Hi, welcome. Hi, how are you?
Good. I just set the tea here.
Oh, such lovely tea. What kind of tea are we having today?
Earl Grey today.
Oh, nice. I'm going to go ahead and enjoy myself a nice cup of Earl Grey.
Have you heard the news? I just read the paper. Look at these amendments.
Oh, my dear. No.
After all we've tried to do to help them, our cause was set aside.
We need to do something. How could they bypass us? We had served, we've been fighting to pass our right, our voice to be heard for many years. When are they going to change for us? How did they pass us by? They allowed blacks to vote before us white women? Are we not anybody? Do we not matter? We need to meet. We need to change this.
We need to set a meeting so that way we can all get together and make sure that the women's vote comes first next.
Let's do that.
Can you believe we're here in New York City? The first Seneca convention ever.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. We finally get to have a voice, a woman's voice. We're going to go out and fight. We get to meet Susan B. Anthony and Miss Cat herself. I'm so excited.
This is our turn.
It's our turn, women's turn, finally. Hi, today we're going to talk to you about the suffrage movement and why it's so important. It started in 1848 and lasted until 1920. It was a movement that was fighting for women's voting rights. It was decades-long fight with both activists and reformers, men, women, black and white. It was 100 years to actually win the vote, if you really think of all the years that they were actually asking for the vote. But they didn't actually get tough and start demanding the change until the Simcoe Falls Convention with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and Susan B. Anthony, who demanded change and asked for the Susan B. Anthony Amendment that was later changed before passing to the 19th Amendment.
This was a 2-day convention where the women came together and decided they needed to find a format where they would be heard. So many times that they've helped with the other civil rights movements, and where the women's right to vote was set to the side. So they came up with the Declaration of Sentiments, which had the 12 resolutions, and they actually formatted it in a similar fashion as the Declaration of Independence, so that way they not only heard but kind of respected for having the capability to come up with something that was just as good, and they were able to express themselves through legislation in the same manner.
And you had famous men such as Frederick Douglass, a black man himself, who after achieving the vote, didn't forget about those women who fought beside him, joining these women as an activist and a reformer himself to help achieve the vote. It was a wonderful thing, a powerful thing, and it changed the world we know today.
Okay, so in this part, we're kind of talking about some of the obstacles the suffrage movement had to endure. A lot of the problems came from what was going on in the current events at that time. we had this group of women that was trying to fight for right to vote, and inevitably it didn't even really become as strong until they joined in with the women's temperance movement.
Exactly. This temperance movement was basically calling out the liquor industries, telling them how they're destroying the home. And as they united the liquor industry, for example, as you see here, they feared that if women were to gain the vote, that it would destroy their industry. So the passing of the 18th Amendment basically um, caused prohibition. They feared if women were to keep the vote, that it would continue. They would never be done or be able to get rid of the 18th Amendment. Think of the population of women. How many women do we have in the world? How many voters would we have? That would be about what, 50% of the population, just give or take, not including the liquor industry. Another one was
the child labor laws, and a lot of the women may have changed that because as a mother, they wouldn't want their children getting hurt, and they wanted to ensure their safety while they were working. And a lot of these manufacturers didn't want to put in the money to improve their factories.
Oh no. And of course, pay the wages as well. Women were still lowest paid. Not only would they put in the time, lowest paid. They didn't want their children out there risking their destroying their household. They also feared, many voters feared that if women got the vote too, that women would be basically gaining too much power, have too much say. It would change their their households. You would have a woman with outside the house more into politics. Who knows where they would have gone, back then. Look where women are today, because women do, things have changed. They feared that advancement. They were afraid of what would have happened, how things would have changed. They didn't know, and they were scared of it. So basically that.
Come on, let's go. All right. We will be heard.
We will be heard. I'm tired of being quiet. Let's make some noise. Break stuff. Hello. Today we're going to talk to you, continue talking to you about the suffrage movement, and basically what the difference is between a suffragist and a suffragette, which they're very similar. They were both fighting for the suffrage movement, but they had different campaign methods.
The suffragists preferred a more macro approach. They were educated, and they came from middle class and upper class homes. They were property owners, and they wanted a more peaceful protest. So they would go to legislation and the local government, even state governments, and try to appeal through the laws of the land.
And the suffragette basically took a little bit more aggressive approach. They kind of got a little bit more tired of waiting for the movement to happen. So they decided to be heard more dramatically. So they started breaking, damaging property. Signs are great. Both parties did signs, they're great. They would still have their signs, but they would get into they would continue with their signs very loudly. Ladylike was thrown out the window. They didn't care so much to be ladylike. They also went on a hunger strike, which later caused them to be force-fed in jail. They were both arrested multiple times. Both suffragists and suffragettes were arrested, violently arrested. And basically that sums up what the difference is between the two. Thank you.
Okay, so in this section, we're going to talk about the symbolism for the women's suffrage movement. And the National Women's Party actually put out a publication in December of 1913 where they explain the colors of the flag that is right behind me. It says, purple is the color of loyalty, constancy to purpose, unswerving steadfastness to a cause. White, the emblem of purity, symbolizes the quality of our purpose. And gold, the color of light and life, is as the torch that guides our purpose, pure and unswerving.
Well, as she was explaining the colors of the movement, the women's suffrage movement, it was really important to have these colors and the symbols to represent, because every single one of those colors were added onto almost everything they had that represented their flyers, their everything they wore, from their pins to their sashes, also their flag. And why their flag was so important, because it represented that cause. Alice Paul was one of the ones that adapted activists for this cause. They designed this flag and the stars to represent every state that was supporting the passing of the 19th Amendment. So every state that ratified the 19th Amendment, they would hand sew that star onto the flag. Of course, there wasn't that many states at the time to ratify it. They were constantly fighting and changing. So as they were changing and persuading those states to ratify, they would add that star. So it was a huge blessing. It was a huge change. And it was representation of everybody that is united to the cause. Hi, today we're going to talk to you basically about passing of the 19th Amendment and how it impacted the suffrage movement. This is what they were looking for. This is the fight that they were fighting for so long. Now, as you know, the suffragists were going state by state. Mostly the West states were ratifying the 19th Amendment. They were struggling to get some of the southern states to actually pass the 19th Amendment. So the last state that they were in hopes to pass this 19th Amendment was Tennessee. They needed 36 states to pass this. At the time, they had just received the support of President Woodrow Wilson. He gave the support. Now, as we say, what do we say about Woodrow Wilson? Did he want to give that support?
No, not really. I don't think he wanted to, but unfortunately, Woodrow Wilson suffered a severe stroke and he became ill. And so his wife Edith, and they actually write a book on it. It's Madam President, and they say that she was actually one of the first women presidents because of the 25th Amendment, and he was ill at the time. So essentially, she was helping during his sickness. And that's actually when the 19th Amendment was signed by President Wilson.
And also he feared his reputation, his bad publicity. You know, he didn't want to leave the White House with bad publicity on having his name battered, right? So you have to remember that. So he didn't want that bad publicity. Now, not only did he give the support, but right before he gave the support, Congress and the Senate and the House, all of them were already approving and ratifying the amendment. So they were down to Tennessee, the 36th state, which became the War of the Roses. As you see, the monument behind us is support of some women that were supporting and fighting for the passing of the 19th Amendment.
One of the other interesting facts about this time period, and they're in Tennessee, and why they called it the War of the Roses is they were using different colored roses to represent what side they actually supported. So the red, if you wore a red rose, it actually meant that you did not support the passing of the women's right to vote. But if you wore a yellow rose, that actually meant that you wanted the 19th Amendment to pass.
And of course, as you were going there to vote, despite what you were going to say, they already knew what or how you were voting because you were already wearing the rose. You were already wearing it on your dress code, right? So there's a funny story or a sweet story, as we would say, especially mothers, right, of a young senator named Harry T. Byrne, who was one of the last ones to get his vote, and he was the tie-breaking vote, going on wearing a red rose pinned to his jacket coat, walking up there late because he was reading a letter from his mother who basically stated for him to support support the women, right? And that his vote does matter. Now, his reputation could have been on the line, his job. He was a young senator. So as he was going there with his beautiful red rose, he stepped up and he said, I support the amendment. And everybody was shocked. Famous pictures, a story. He wasn't the only one, though, that changed his mind that day, but he was the tiebreaker. And being a tiebreaker, you always remember that tiebreaker, right? You always remember him. So it was great. It was a great story. It passed. Now, this changed the whole United States. It changed all women, men, everybody. Now we're going to talk to you about some of the changes that happened and occurred after the passing of the 19th Amendment. You would think everything was glory and everybody got what they wanted, but it wasn't quite like that. So let's talk about some changes that happened and things that didn't change, maybe that we may have thought that they would have changed.
So, right after, women got the vote, of course, I mean, everyone's excited. We finally did it. We got our right to vote. And that was liberating. It was wonderful. So, a lot of time the women, they started wearing pants. They started feeling independent, that they could make their own decisions. They tried to go for different types of jobs and not just secretaries or housewives. They looked for trying to get an education.
Oh yes, that was huge. Education, but not just being a teacher. Some of them started challenging some of the men fields, such as like being an engineer. Fashion industry was already being pushed before the passing of the 19th Amendment, and then really targeted after. You had women wearing darker shades of colors, makeup, and clothes, cutting, like she said, cutting the hair. Some of them were scared to cut their hair, so they would cut the front of their hair and have it long in the back, which is kind of like, you would think, ew, but they did it. It was like a challenge. Hats started really, really big, and they got smaller, right? So things like that started changing. Big thing that started happening too was shaving of the legs. It started before the passing of the amendment, but more and more women started accepting it. In fact, it made headlines. Stupid women are cutting their legs and having to go to the doctors because they're cutting their legs so much, right? Because they're showing skin now. They're showing legs. They needed to shave their legs so that they can be pretty for when their legs are being shown, right? Smoking and drinking. More women started taking on a lot of smoking and drinking. they took on more responsibilities. So I guess they felt that they could, right? The men were doing it. So let's talk about some of the things that didn't change that you would have thought that should have changed, right? Such as,
well, definitely pay. And I think that's something that we're still dealing with today. There are some women that are able to make more money than men. However, there is a disparity between the two genders. Most men make more than women, even if they're doing the exact same job. And this is something that we're still, equal rights, equal pay. We still hear that today, but it didn't. And right away, the gender roles at home didn't change either. The women wanted all these liberations, but they were still responsible for cleaning, cooking, being submissive to their husband while they were trying to be dependent, taking care of the children, and it wasn't easy.
which led to, what do you think? Divorce rate started increasing, like, bye-bye, see you later, I don't have time for you, just joking. But the divorce rate started increasing, right? But let's think about it. So it peaked really in the 50s and 70s. But think about it. They're taking all these responsibilities. They don't feel the need to have somebody weigh them down. If they're not going to be an equal partner and treat them equally, some women just didn't want to deal with it. Or, men were used to the women bowing down, right, to them, and women were feeling more entitled. So things were changing. Things have changed. There's a lot more women in elected positions today as well. Things were just gradually changing, as Ms. Erica talked about how pays changed. Women did and still do fight for higher wages today, or equal pay. A lot of it's not really something that we're still dealing with. But back then they were really dealing with it. They were happy that they did receive a paycheck, happy that they were able to have a vote, but it didn't justify not having that equality as men, doing the exact same work, that same labor, right? They should receive that. Household duties, like Erica mentioned, like, if I'm going to have to work a full-time job, you should have to split some of these chores with me. And it just wasn't like that. They were expected to still do all those duties at home. Sorry, gotta get to clean those toilets, gotta go do the groceries. I mean, everything that they were responsible before going to work, they were having to do. So even gaining the vote didn't take any of those changes away. So their daily lives, their responsibilities, the way we look at women, and you automatically judge them, or you automatically, like, that's a woman's job, or that's a woman's duty, that part hasn't changed, and still doesn't change in many of our lives today. That's basically it, other than you wanted to talk about this beautiful picture here, right? It's a great image of a woman basically saying, we can do it.
And she was actually an important symbol. Rosie the Riveter, she stood for, the women who took over during World War II. A lot of the men had to go to war, and that did help the women in some ways, where they got the independence because a lot of the men were gone, and they took on factory jobs, they took on mechanic jobs, engineering jobs. But unfortunately, when the men came back from the war, the women were expected to go back home, and I think some of that had to do with the increase with the divorces as well.
Yes, they can do anything that a man can do. That's basically what it was. It was that representation, that symbol, right, that women stood for and about. Well, hopefully you liked the lecture, and see you next time. Support the cause, please. It's time. Support the cause.
Women's rights. it's time